Daf Yomi, Tractate Chullin, page 14b. Yadalin on base, top of the page with the words Hasam Kidikatani Ta'ama. Hasam Kidikatani Ta'ama Amaloi Rabbi Meir Iatamoide Shema Yibaka Hanod Nimsa Shoise Tivolim Lemafreya Omar Lehen Dechishi Yibaka. Okay. Ela miditani ayo. Okay. We'll translate that part first, and then we'll. It's like Ayo said. It's the middle of something, so I'll start from the beginning. The Gemara comments. There is no proof. That is no proof. As there, the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is as is taught in the latter clause of the Braita. The rabbis said to Rabbi Meir, "Don't you concede that perhaps the wineskin will burst?" The wineskin. Where have I heard that before? The wineskin will burst if you put them in old wineskin. If you put them in, right. But new wineskins, it's for the new wine. That's where I heard it, yeah. The wine among Samaritans. It's also in the, okay, the Gemara comments that is no proof, as there the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is as is taught in the latter clause of the Bride. The rabbi says, Rameir, don't you concede that perhaps the wineskin will burst before he manages to separate the truma and this person will have been found retroactively to be drinking untithed produce. Rameir said to the rabbis, the mere possibility that this may occur is not a concern. When it actually bursts, I will be concerned. Evidently, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is not due to his rejection of the principle of retroactive designation, but due to his concern that the wineskin will burst before the ties are actually separated. Ela miditani ayo. That's what I was saying before. Rather, the fact that Rabbi Yehuda does not accept the principle of retroactive designation, which is breira, is learned from that which Ayo teaches with regard to the joining of Shabbat boundaries in a case where one knows that two Torah scholars are planning to deliver lectures on Shabbat outside the city limits, one east of the city and one west of the city, and on Shabbat Eve, one has not yet decided which of the lectures he wishes to attend. In that case, he may place the food for the joining of boundaries on both sides of the city and stipulate that he will be able to go beyond the city limits in whichever direction he chooses. Titani Ayo, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Sabbath day's journey. Wow. Titani Ayo, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein adam masna al shnei devarim ke'echad, ela im ba chacham lemizrach, eruvo lemizrach, lema'arav, eruvo lema'arav, ilu lekan ulekan lo. As Ayo teaches, Rabbi Yehuda says a person may not stipulate that his joining of the boundaries will take effect on two matters as one. Rather, he may stipulate that if one sage comes to the east, his joining of the boundaries takes effect to the east, and if he comes to the west, his joining takes effect to the west, while if he stipulates that it should take effect to here or to there, and he will go in whichever direction he chooses, in that case, the joining does not take effect. Okay. We have in a ma'ishna lekan de lo de ein brero mizrach umar nami ein brero. And we discussed this brayta, what is different in a case where one stipulates that it should take effect to here or to there, such that the joining does not take effect. It is because there is no retroactive designation. If so, stipulating that the joining will take effect to the east or west, depending on where the sage goes, should also not take effect because there is no retroactive designation. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan said this is a case where when he makes the stipulation, the sage has already come to either the east or the west, and the joining takes effect in that direction. He makes a stipulation because he does not know where the sage came. The joining takes effect without the principle of retroactive designation. Nevertheless, since it is clear from the first case of Ayo that Rabbi Yehuda does not accept the principle of retroactive designation, the question remains, from where is it derived? Then an animal is slaughtered on Shabbat or Yom Kippur is forbidden for the day that it was slaughtered. El Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef is Gematria Mashiach. El Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yehuda Dechelemi. It's non. Kol HaKelim. Hanitolim B'Shabbos. Shivrei Hanitolim. ובלבד שיהיו עושים מעין מלאכה שברי רבו לחסוס בהן פי חוביס שברי זכוכיס לחסוס בהן פי הפח. Rather, Rav Yosef said, when Rav said that the halacha that consumption of the animals prohibited for that day is the opinion of Yehuda. The reference is to the opinion of Yehuda with regard to vessels, as we learned in the Mishnah in Shabbat 124b. With regard to all vessels that may be moved on Shabbat, their shards may be moved as well, provided they are suited for some type of labor. Shards of a large bowl may be used to cover the mouth of a barrel. Shards of glass, of a glass vessel, may be used to cover the mouth of a cruise. The cruise. Spi Levitch. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Ubilvad shiyoisin mein melachton. Shivrei reivo. Latzuk lesoichon mikpo. Shivrei zechuris. Latzuk lesoichon shemen. Rabbi Yehuda says, and it is permitted to use the shards, provided that they are suited for a type of labor similar to their original use. In the case of shards of a large bowl, it must be possible to pour a thick broth into them, and in the case of shards of a glass vessel, it must be possible to pour oil into them. Me'en melachton in me'en melocha cheres lo alma keven lo itchan me'etmol ach meloche asiri hochanami kevan de lo itchan me'etmol asura. The Gemara infers if they are suited for a type of labor similar to their original use, yes, they may be moved. But if they are suitable for another type of labor, they may not be moved. Apparently, since the shard was not prepared from yesterday for this type of labor, it is prohibited to move it. Here too, since the animal that was slaughtered was not prepared from yesterday, it is prohibited to eat it. Amar le Abaye midami. Hasa mikara keli, v'hashda shever kli. Havle nolad v'aso. Hachamiga uchla ulbesay oichel uchla the peras who Abai says, Rabbi Yosef, are these cases comparable? There, in the Mishnah with regard to vessels, initially it was a vessel, and now it is a shard of a vessel, and it is a case of an item that came into being, and it is therefore prohibited to move it. Here, in the case of an animal slaughtered on Shabbat, initially during its lifetime it was designated as food, and ultimately after slaughter it is food, so it is merely food that was separated. Ifrat. Vishamina leila Yehuda damar uchla nichbara shavir dami tisnan ein sochadin esa peirois lehoitzi men mashkin v'imyatzu miyatz benasuhin. And we heard that it is Rabbi Yehuda who says food that was separated is permitted, as we learned in the Mishnah in Shabbat 143b. One may not squeeze fruits on Shabbat in order to extract liquids from them. And if liquids seeped out on their own, it is prohibited to use them on Shabbat, lest one come to squeeze fruit on Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the fruits were designed for eating, the liquid that seeped from them on Shabbat is permitted, and if the fruits were designated for their liquids, the liquids that seep from them on Shabbat are forbidden, lest he come to squeeze them on Shabbat. With regard to fruits that are designated for consumption, liquid is considered food that was separated and is permitted. The same halacha applies with regard to an animal slaughtered on Shabbat. Since it was designated for consumption, its meat is food that was separated and should be permitted according to Rabbi Yehuda. Lavit Marala, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Moed Yehoshua Rabbi Yehuda, Lechachamim Besalizei Simenovim. The Gemara rejects that interpretation that states that, on the contrary, there is proof that Rabbi Yehuda would prohibit eating an animal that was slaughtered on Shabbat. Wasn't it stated with regard to that mission? Rabbi Yehuda says, Shmuel says, Rabbi Yehuda conceded to the rabbis in the case of baskets of olives and grapes that are typically designated for their liquids, even though one had planned to eat them, that liquid that seeps from them is forbidden. Alma, we see, Kevan nilischita kaimi yahiv daite hachanami kevan nilischita kaima yahiv daite. Apparently, since olives and grapes are typically designated for squeezing, one sets his mind to use them for the liquids, and were it permitted for him to use their liquids that seep out on Shabbat, the concern is that he will come to squeeze them on Shabbat. Therefore, the sages decreed that the liquids are forbidden. Here too, since the animal is designated for slaughter, a person sets his mind to eat it. Therefore, were it permitted for him to eat the meat on Shabbat, the concern is that he will come to slaughter it on Shabbat. Consequently, the sages decreed that the meat is prohibited. Midihu taima, elo l'rav amarav chaluk haya Rabbi Yehuda afilu besali zeisim b'novim. The Gemara justifies Abaya's interpretation of the Mishnah. This explanation is valid only according to Rav, who said that the ruling that it is prohibited to eat an animal slaughtered on Shabbat until after Shabbat is according to the opinion of Yehuda. Didn't Rav say Rabbi Yehuda was in disagreement with the rabbis, even in the case of baskets of olives and grapes? According to Rav himself, Just as Rabbi Yehuda deems permitted liquids that seeped from olives and grapes on their own, Rabbi Yehuda should have also deemed an animal that was slaughtered on Shabbat permitted for that day. Ela Amar of Sheishes Bereder Rab Idi Rabbi Yehuda Neneroisi the Tanya Mitaltalin Neel Chadash Aval Lo Yoshon de Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, of Sheshet, son of Edi, said, when Rav said that the halacha that it is prohibited to consume the animal a day is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The reference is to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to lamps. As it is taught in a Braita, one may move for purposes other than lighting it a new earthenware lamp that was never used, but one may not move an old lamp covered with residue of oil and soot because a person sets it aside from use due to repugnance. Since it was set aside at the beginning of Shabbat, it is set aside for the entire Shabbat, and it may not be moved even if a need to move it arises. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. The same halacha applies with regard to an animal slaughtered on Shabbat, since it was prohibited when Shabbat began as a limb of a living being. It remains prohibited for the entire Shabbat. Eimar de Shamat lehe Rabbi Yehuda b'muktzeh machmas mius Muktzeh machmas isur mishamas le in ditznan Rabbi Yehuda Omer. The Gemara rejects that analogy. Say that you heard Rabbi Yehuda rule that is prohibited for the entire Shabbat in a case where it is set aside due to repugnance, like the old lamp. Did you hear that he said that it is prohibited for the entire Shabbat in a case where it is set aside due to a prohibition, like the animal? The answer is yes. As we learned in a Braita that Rabbi Yehuda says